Live from Michigan City, Indiana, it's Long Arm TV Live with Jamie Wallen.
Hello, everybody, and welcome to the Quilters Apothecary. And thank you, of course, Rich, for that amazing dramatic introduction, as usual. So today, obviously, even though it's Quilters Apothecary, what we're actually going to be doing is dirty pour acrylic painting. I've had over a few hundred people request if I would go over my tutorial for the dirty pour acrylic painting. And if you don't know what we're talking about, I'll show you a few examples of the finished work. Rich, do you have those examples that we can put up on the screen? So here we have an example, which is actually a red and gray based type dirty pour acrylic, and you'll notice the cells, and then the next one. And when we're talking about cells, what we're actually talking about when you go in there and you look at that are the little bubbles. It looks like those oil bubbles that we used to see at the beginning of movie theaters or drive-ins and intermission and such. But they're amazing. They make incredible pieces. You can make them any size. Is there a few more examples that we can toss up there so people get the idea? And there's a nice long one. Wonderful. And there we go. That's one of my favorites. I did that one in California with my wonderful California tribe. Um, and that turned out wonderful. And then this one was an early one. So you can see it's a little more watery. It's a little more fluid. So my paints were mixed a little bit thinner, which we're going to talk about a bit. So those are a few examples of the dirty pour acrylic paintings. Thank you, Mr. Ritchie. All right, and yes, no, I am not wearing my baseball cap today. I actually have my painting cap on. Um, when I have the painting cap on, I can't go near any quilts. That's kind of the rule around here. It's kind of like don't touch your face rules that we're all used to right now. So let me start by saying this is called dirty pour acrylic painting for a reason, because we are actually using acrylic paint. Now, you can use almost, not all, but almost any acrylic type paint. Let me show you a few examples of the type of acrylic paint that I tend to use. And since this is a beginning acrylic pour video, then what we'll do is we'll just go over those, and I'm not going to flash up per painting what colors I'm using. I'll just call it out as we do it. So when we're talking about acrylic paint, we're going to be talking about, I'm going to go over here to this camera so you can get a view. These type of tube paints, or you can also use the less expensive craft paints. Now, because most of my stuff gets covered, excuse me, in an acrylic, a polyacrylic, the longevity is going to be there. So, you know, I have some pieces that I've done a year or two ago with the less expensive paints, and they still look wonderful, as well as the higher end paints. And you can go as high end as you want. This is kind of an artist grade, um, mid to high level from Michaels. Of course, we also have the other two paints. This is Master's Touch brand. I believe that would be a Hobby Lobby brand. And then, of course, we have this one. They come in tubes or they come in these containers right here. So they come in all types of different containers. They come in regular acrylic, but they also have some metallic brands, and you can use the metallic as well. It's just a little bit of a different mix when you mix those. So let me get those out of the way. If you're on a serious budget, then they also have like the Anitas, that brand, which is a lot less expensive, and I think they have about 15 or 20 colors in this. So really, just you don't have to have a lot of money to do this as long as you have the right supplies. And it's up to you. You know, I like using the mid-level paints. So, um, you know, I find for me personally, I'm not quite ready unless I'm doing a serious piece um, to use the more expensive paints because again, just like anything, just like thread in quilting, just like any paints, when you're doing any type of paints, you have a lot of different levels of expense as far as that goes. So that's the type of acrylic paint we use. Now, the other type of acrylic paint that you can use and that I have some people use, and I use it, I tend to use it for a base a lot of the time, is the Dutch Boy DuraClean, and I get that at, I think our Menards sells that. I think that's a Menards brand. I don't know if it's a universal brand, but I do know that typically a Menards is going to carry this, and I get it in white. And I like to use this as a base because it is an acrylic, and it works well for the base of my paint as well as in my paint. Now, I'm typically only going to be using my whites for this, which you're going to see what I mean because I like to do a base coat on the canvas of white to start with so that the paint slips and slides over it. So that is another option. So a couple of the other supplies that you're going to need, aside from the acrylic paints, you're going to have a medium. What is a medium? Now, my medium is pre-mixed in this particular container, and what my medium is a mixture that I add my paints to thin them out so they're not so thick and so that they flow better over the canvas. And for my medium, what I like to use is the Flood Floetrol, which you can get at any um, paint store, I believe. I get mine at Menards because we have a Menards locally. Home Depot, you can get them at Lowe's as well. But what I have found is that Menards always tends to carry the gallon sizes, which I like. This gallon of Floetrol, it runs about $12, $13. Now, what this is originally made for, this is made to mix with paint to stretch out the paint, make it last longer, but not deaden or dull the color. So if you, say for example, you were painting a wall and you had 4 gallons of paint, you could actually add 3 gallons of Floetrol to that, get those gallons of paint, and it would extend that paint and make it, it would go a lot further to paint the walls, but it wouldn't dull the colors. You'd have to use an awful lot of this before it would start to lighten the color or dull the color. So Floetrol is one of the items that I use to make my medium, because that's what we're talking about now, is our paint medium that we actually mix our colored acrylic to. The other thing that I like to add is Elmer's glue all. And when I say Elmer's glue all, I mean glue all, not school glue. There's a difference. And this I actually get at Lowe's. Lowe's tends to carry the gallon sizes of the Elmer's glue all. And the this costs, I think it's about 14 bucks in our area. Might be a little different in your area, but I know for a gallon of the glue all, it's 14 bucks. So you've got about 12, 13 bucks, and then you've got 14 bucks. But this is going to take you a long ways. It's going to do an awful lot of paintings. Now, the other thing that I like to add to mine, because I do sell some of my artwork, and I'm doing some more serious pieces now, is I'm using the Golden brand, which is an artist brand, GAC 800. And I ordered that from, I think, Dick Blick is where we ordered this, and we got the gallon. And the gallon, I have to say, it was a bit pricey. Rich, what was that? We were running like about, it was like 50 bucks, 60 bucks, something like that. I think that was on sale because it's normally a little more expensive, but I don't use an awful lot of this. Now, the other thing that we would mix with our medium would be some water if we so choose. Now, these are the medium choices that we have. But let me say this. I have friends that use simply glue all and water. So they'll do 70% glue all or 60% glue all to 40% water. And that's what they use as medium. Some people only use the Floetrol, period, as their medium. And then they add a little bit of water to that. So again, there's a lot of different combinations of um, of the medium for their bases for to add to our paints out there. My recipe that I like to use is 60% of the Flood Floetrol. I like to use 30% of the Gluol. So I get a container, I do 60% Floetrol, 30% of the Gluol, and then I'll do 10% of the GAC 800. Now what the GAC 800 is for, it's for crazing and cracking. And that is so the paint as it dries doesn't crack or craze, makes dips, makes valleys. It'll keep it a little more smooth. Now, typically, I'm going to do a lot of coats of polyacrylic on top of my paintings. So, you know, even if I do get a little bit of cratering, not cracking, but cratering, it's still going to work out fine. And I actually do resin a lot of my stuff. So that way it will leaven it out and make it like glass. So I don't worry so much about that. But I use about 10% of this. And again, I don't use a lot because I'm also on a budget. And, you know, but it does help. Mr. Ritchie said, yes, he is. So these are the mixtures, the products that we use to actually make our medium. So now, number one, when I start out, typically white is going to be the key one for me. So I make a big mixture of white premix, and also my medium I premix. So I usually always have like a half a gallon to a gallon of the medium sitting around, and it sits there. I've had it set anywhere from a month to maybe 3 months, and I've still used it. Now I haven't experienced any trouble with it, but you may have some of the 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 more extreme dirty pour painters say, yeah, I only like to use mine for a month or two. You know, you have to kind of do a little bit of exploring on your own. I haven't had a whole lot of trouble, and I've used it up to 3 or 4 months later. Um, and then same thing, I use a lot of white. That's something that I use a ton of. And so I will pre-mix, of course, with my medium and white. And we'll talk about how to mix the paints together with your medium as we go along. So now let's also take a second now and let's move from the paint and let's talk about what are we going to paint on. Well, there are a lot of different things that we can actually paint on. One of the things when you're starting out are the budget canvases. You can go to the Michaels, you can use your coupon, you can go if you choose to do the Hobby Lobby, you can go to Joann's, you can go to any of the local art stores, you know, that you have coupons for. What I usually suggest is when you go, get the bundles. So I get the value packs to start with because you're gonna make some mistakes. And when you do make mistakes, you can actually repaint over what you have once it dries and once you clean it off. And we'll talk about that in a minute. But typically what I like to do is I like to start with a canvas. The one thing that I do want to say though is I only use stapled canvases when I buy the budget. Some of them will be glued. And what I found on some of the canvases is that the glue will let loose and your painting's trashed unless you re-stretch the canvas. So I like to go ahead and use the staple ones. They're not any more expensive. And like I said, my packs, I think this is an 11 by 14, comes in an 8 pack. And I think that runs about 20 bucks for me. So that's a nice pack of them. And you can get them less expensive. You can get them more expensive. The other thing that you can use is you can actually use cradled wood canvas or boards. And it's simply a board and then it has an edge frame. And I like the 2-inch cradled woods. I'd love to show you one, but I actually sold my last one. So it's 2 inches of wood. And what I like to do is use painter's tape around the edge to keep the natural wood. And then after I've done my dirty pour on the top, I get the natural wood on the edge. On these, I tend to go over the edge with my painting, as you're going to see. So these are some of the options that you can use. The other option that you can use are tiles, bathroom tiles. I like to use the bathroom tiles. I like to use these for coasters. Now, when I use these for coasters, once I get them painted and they have seasoned for a week or two, then what I like to use is a resin product. And later on down the road, I will do a video on doing the polyacrylic on top of the regular paintings and then resining my tile for my coasters. But that'll be down the road. But I do like using the tiles for coasters or even for artwork on the wall. You can do a series of a 9 patch or those sorts of really cool things. So those are a couple different options. Get that out of the way. Let me grab a little drink here. Sorry. Ginger ale lemonade. All right. Now, next thing, let's go back to the canvas. So since most people are going to be starting with the canvas, the one thing that I will say is before you even start, what I like to do is fill a spray bottle with hot water, and it wants to be hot. And then what I like to do is I like to spray the back of my canvas, because when these come and they're sitting in the stores, they tend to stretch out a little bit, and so they're not real firm. And so this one I sprayed earlier, and it was pretty loose. It actually was hammocked in just a little bit. And so what I did is I sprayed the back, rub the canvas on the back. The top has a little bit of a coat. And then I go into each of the corners, because if I don't go into a corner and put a squirt there, I find that the corners will buckle a little bit on me. And so I like to do that. And then that way, in about an hour, this is going to be perfectly tight. Hear that? Just like a drum. And that's what you want. So let me set that aside. Again, I want to say, like this one, I did a while back. I did not like it. It looks a little too, one of those maps from the sky kind of things, so it doesn't do a lot for me. And so what I'm going to do is I'm just going to go ahead and paint over this. Now, because there's silicone in here, and we'll get to that in just a little bit, but because there's silicone in here, before I actually am going to paint over this, I'm actually going to use Windex. Some people use Windex, some people use rubbing alcohol, and I'm going to clean off the surface, because where there's silicone, the paint will avoid. It's like a resist, so it's going to pull away from any area where there's any type of silicone. So I want to clean this with Windex or with rubbing alcohol, and it's just a nice light wipe a few times. And when you look at the side, let me see if I can get a good view. But if you can kind of see when I hit the light right, those little drops of the silicone that are coming up through the paint, which is what makes those wonderful bubbles. Okay, but this one's going to get painted over. So you can reuse a canvas that you don't like, which is wonderful. I don't worry a lot about wasting paint with this. You know, you are going to waste paint. It's just, whoop, it's just kind of the nature of the beast. The other thing you're going to need, obviously, are your cups. Now, I have these small little bathroom cups. Actually, Rich uses these um, to do his morning teeth work or whatever he does in there. And I like to use these for my smaller canvases.
And you pick them out of my trash,
I
out of
do.
my bathroom, and get them for this.
I do indeed. I dig through his trash and I pull these out so they could be reused. I like to use everything as many times as I can. The other thing are plastic cups, and I like to use the clear, but sometimes I don't always have that option. And so for some of my bigger pieces, I will use the solo cups. And if I see these on a big sale, I'll go ahead and use them. And I'm pretty much a use things over and over again. So once I finish using these, I will tend to wash them. Now, when I do get any of these cups, the one thing that I like to be aware of is the texture of the actual cup. For example, this particular cup, and we're going to switch to the front camera. So for this particular cup, you can see there's not a lot of texture. It's nice and smooth, and it's got a nice smooth inner there. On this cup, you'll see that you've got some ribs. And so what happens is that paint can get caught on these ribs. So I certainly prefer these type of cups. And I actually prefer them to be clear. But again, when these are on sale and I'm not doing a video, they're fine to use because I know what I'm going to get. Okay. So now the other thing that I like to use, because I need to mix my paint and my medium, is stir sticks. Tongue depressors. I get those at my local art shop. I think you can get 300 for $2.99, and if you have your coupon, you get it for a lot cheaper. And I go ahead and get the big ones. They have big ones, and they also have these little teeny tinies. So you get a lot of the teeny tinies, and I bought a ton of them because they were so cheap, and I thought, oh, those will be a better deal. But I gotta tell you, what I found is the big ones are the way to go. So, and I do reuse them, I wash them off, and that sort of things. And I also resin them, so I can use the resined ones over and over and over again. But right now I have fresh ones. So again, if you get them, go ahead and get the big guys, because again, you're going to be using them a lot, and they're just easier to control. So now let's take a minute and let's talk about actually the paint mixing. So what I'm going to do, let me get some of this out of the way here. Get my medium out. All right, Mr. Ritchie, I'm going to mix up some yellow. So we will just go right here. Okay, so I'm going to go ahead and mix up some yellow, because yellow is the one color that I don't have mixed. I've mixed all the other colors ahead to save us some time. So I'm going to go in here, and I'm going to put in, come on, well, there you go. Excuse me. There you go. Okay, so now we have the yellow, and I've got a nice amount in there. And again, you can see it's nice and thick. I have my wet cloth. I'm going to keep my wet cloth, wipe off my hands. And now what I'm going to do is I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to grab my medium. Do you see how I've labeled my empty jug? And I use the empty jug for my medium. This is my 60-30-10. 60% Floetrol, 30% Gluol, 10% GAC 800. And of course, I've mixed this up. Now, what I typically like to do, if I know that I'm going to be doing dirty pour painting, I like to mix up all my paints the night before. And I have mixed up all my other colors except for the yellow. So on this one, I'm going to start with half and half. So whatever amount of the yellow paint, I'm going to match to the amount of the Floetrol medium mix. And I'm going to stir. I don't want to do this. I don't want to stir it up so much that I'm going to bring air bubbles. I keep my stick in the bottom of my cup and I stir it this way because that's going to give me a much smoother paint, and I'm not going to have so many air bubbles in there. So again, I went 50-50. Same amount of paint, same amount of medium. And again, it's going to depend on the paint, because you can have some of the heavy body paints, which are a lot thicker, so you'd be adding more medium to those because that paint tends to be a little more high end. And of course, you're going to end up putting more medium because the paint actually has more pigment in it. The color is going to stay truer than some of the less expensive, more craft art paints. So now what I like to do is I've mixed that up. I'm going to go down. Now notice when I do that, let me see how we can, when don't look at the stick, look inside the cup. Can you see that mound? Okay, that's too thick yet. What I want to see is a little bit of a mound, and then I want to see the ring around the mound a little bit, stringing on top, but then I want it to disappear within about 2 seconds. So I'm going to add a little bit of medium, a little more, because that's a pretty heavy paint, that Artist Loft from Michaels. And again, like I said, you never want to lift your stick and go back down like this. You don't want to whip it. You want to keep it in there and stir it. Okay, it's getting better. Now, I put enough medium in there to my liking. I don't like to add too much more of the medium. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to take a little bit of water. And when I say a little bit, I mean like half of a teaspoon for this size, and that's a pretty full cup. And then I'm going to mix it, and that's going to thin it down just a little bit to get it to be the texture. I don't want it really, really, really thick for what we're doing today. You know, there are times when I like thick acrylic paint. This is not one of them. I want it to be, like I said, I want to see my trace at the top of the paint when I use my stick and do this. I want to see it for about 2 seconds, but then I want it to disappear. I don't want it to mound up too high. Okay, that's looking pretty good. I'm going to put just a hair more. Stir it up. Nice. See the trace? See that? How it just sits there, but then within about 2 seconds, it's gone. It sinks down into the paint. And that, for me, is perfect. Now, there are other techniques that I'm going to do, and I'll do another video down the road on that, or we might do it today. Depends on how much time we have. But when I do the Dutch pours, where I use the blow dryer, I like it to be a little thinner. Now, same there. You can see 1, 2, when that paint hits there, within about 1, 2, it's gone. So that's nice and blended up. Now I have a bunch of different colors. Now I also have, here is a lovely scarlet kind of metallic, which I like. Okay, so now we have our base. So now, make sure I get all my lids on things to keep myself as organized as I can be. The next thing that I want to talk about is going to be the actual silicone. So I like to use silicone, and there are a couple different types of silicone that you can use. When I make my dirty pours, so I layer my cup, which you're going to see in a minute, I like to spray the inside of my cup with spray silicone, so that way, when I tip the cup upside down on the canvas, that paint is going to slide right out, and it's going to be awesome. The thing to remember is that, yeah, but you have a lot of silicone in there. So once I spray the inside, I'll go in with a paper towel and I'll just kind of wipe the inner edge so there's not so much silicone, because I don't want too many cells. I don't want to go too crazy. Unless I do. There are times when I do. When I want a water effect, then I do. The other silicone that you can get, which you can find at a lot of the, let me wipe this off a little bit and we'll switch to the other camera so I can show you, is this coconut mix anti-breakage serum. This has become real popular with the dirty pours that don't get the actual silicone. It's got a silicone type base in it, but this is a nice substitute if you want to do some painting and some dirty acrylics with the kids and you don't want to wait to order your proper silicone. You can go to the store and get this, and most of the chains will carry this. I believe Walmart carries this as well in the beauty section. Okay, so now my absolute favorite would be the Spot On Treadmill, and that is the silicone that I prefer. This is my absolute favorite. This is kind of what most of the serious pours will tend to use. Now the thing to remember is you're not going to use a lot, as you see, but this is my favorite. But like I showed you before, there are some options of different paints to use. Okay, so those are some of the supplies. So now let's go back to our canvases. So with the canvases, what I've done is I will flip my canvas over, and I purchased the pins that you would use in a corkboard, little thumbtack pins, and I take these and I put them in the corner of the actual pieces so that way, and I try to get them all level. Now you can go totally crazy, and when you set this down, you can actually get out a level and set it on your piece to make sure that these are all the same level. I do it a lot of times if I'm working on some serious art, but I don't do it all the time. I just try to make it so that it's as flat as can be, and I'm usually pretty happy with that. If you're working on a big piece, I've done canvases as big as 4 foot by 6 foot. And when I do that, I like to use the giant tacks, which are pretty awesome. So again, you're definitely going to want a supply of these for your work. Now, on the back of the canvases, let me go over here to this camera so you can see a little better. We're learning the cameras right now because normally with quilting, it's a little different when we're at the long arm. So now, let me line that up. Am I in? I am in. Okay, so now what I do is I take and I go right into that crack, the corner miter, and I push right in. And that usually goes in pretty smooth. Now some people will have a little hammer handy that they'll tap it in with. Just be gentle because these are plastic aside from the metal pin part, and so they can break. But typically I find I can just put them right in to that crack or the miter in between. The other thing that a lot of people are using are cookie cutters. So if they see cookie cutters, a lot of people use those. Also, if you go in the plumbing department at the hardware store, you'll find the little rings that they use to connect the PVC for plumbing. And you can use those because they're all at the same height, and then the corner just sits on that. The whole point is when you're doing your dirty pour, the paint has to roll off. And so if it's flat, it's going to puddle, and you're going to get this weird thing on the edge. So while it's drying, it needs to be up and off of the actual table. So now we're going to put our last pin in there. Yay. Wipe that off to dry that a little bit. Is it a little crooked? This one? Yeah. And the crooked part, that doesn't matter a lot. When I lay it down, it's pretty stable. So I'm pretty happy with that, just so you know. Okay, so now what I want to do is I'm going to grab my first canvas, and before we start with that, the other item I want to share with you that you're going to need and you're going to have to get over any fear of is going to be a torch. So I use the big torches, and they work really well. You know, you can get an inexpensive torch for like 15 bucks from the hardware stores, and then of course the what would that be? That would be the propane tanks. You can get those, but you can also get the little kitchen ones, which are real small, and they use those for doing the brulee and those sorts of things whenever they want to make something flame in the kitchen. You can find one of those. You can order those on Amazon, but I like using these. The one thing to remember is don't get the absolute cheapest one of these. Now these obviously screw on. So if you've never used a torch, let me just real quick go over that. Let me unscrew it. Okay, and there's a little bit of a pop because there was built up pressure. And you can smell it. It smells a little bit. But now I'm going to take this, and remember, it needs to be threaded properly. You want to make sure that it threads nice and straight. Okay, so and nice and tight, but not so tight that you crack the space. Now they have this little nozzle that turns, the knob, sorry. I turn it on, and then there's a handle, and now I have torch, and then you can adjust that flame down. Now what we use this for with our dirty pour acrylics is that when we put the paint on and then we do the actual dirty pour or tree ring or any of that stuff, there are air bubbles in the paint, and we need to get rid of that. Plus we need to activate the silicone to bring the cells up, and the torch is going to actually do that. You lightly, and again, whenever we are torching, Rich, if you want to turn this guy on. When we're doing that, what we actually do is we want to stay up. I like to stay up at least about a foot, um, and gently go over. I keep my torch moving. I never want to get close. I never want to see smoke from my paint. So again, I simply want to keep it up a bit high so that that way when I'm doing my torching, I'm simply popping any of the bubbles and activating the silicone. Okay, so now Sure.
So Jamie, I think I'm on. Yeah, I'm on. So Deb M from British Columbia, Canada says she uses my Sewer Aid thread treatment for the silicone.
Awesome. Cool. I have not done that, and I have lots of Sower's Aid. I will have to try that. That's wonderful. Well, there you go, everybody. So there's a suggestion. Um, Sower's Aid would be a wonderful option to give a try. And most of us have that in our stash because we're quilters. Okay, now let's start with this. And the very first thing that I'm going to do, let me turn my canvas here. I am going to start, and what I want to do with my canvas to begin with is I'm going to put a layer of white. Now, this is the white that I have. This is my canvas layer. And when I'm looking at this, this is about as thick as the actual paints. And my first layer, my base coat that goes on the canvas, I like to be just a hair bit thinner. And I know everybody does it a little different. I just find that I like it to be just a hair thinner. So I'm going to add a little water to that. I'm going to stir this. Now, and I'm not adding any silicone to this. I don't want to because number one, I like to use a base of white. Now, sometimes I'll use black and I'll put a black coat on here, but 90% of the time I'm going to use white. And the reason that I like to use white is I like to put a nice around the edge, go right in here, is because I don't want bare canvas to be there when I do my flip cup, because what can happen at that point is the silicone and the actual color part of the paint, which you're going to see we're going to put silicone in the other paint. What will happen is the silicone will work as a resist and there will be bare canvas shining through or showing through. And when I put this base on, what I find is I have a layer, a protective layer, and make sure you go around the edge. You want to make sure, just use your fingers. You can wear gloves if you want. I figure I'm a fabric dyer, so I'm in for a penny, in for a pound. So I just put that on there, and I could have gone just a little bit thinner on that. Now, so I'm going to let that set there for a minute, wipe off my hands, and then we're going to actually do our flip cup with the paint. We're going to layer our paints. Now, I've got a nice base coat of paint on there. I'm going to go ahead, and what I like to do is grab my torch, turn it down, and I'm going to keep it far away, and I'm going to start popping those bubbles. See how the bubbles, I don't know if you can see that, but as I go over that, I am popping all of those bubbles. I don't want to rest in one spot. If I sit there like this, then what will happen is I'll get a little smoke right there. I don't want to do that. Now again, when you look at this, I can see texture there, so what that tells me is I did not make my base coat thin enough, so I should have added just a little bit more water. That being said, I've done this a lot, and it's fine just like that. It will still work just fine. It's just I prefer a little bit more water in my base coat. Okay, so now we have all of our colors all mixed up. I have about 10 different colors here. So my next thing that I'm going to do is this. All of my paints, I don't want to go ahead and mix because I may not use all these paints. So I save all my pickle jars and everything, and I use those to store, much to the consternation of Mr. Ritchie in our house. We have tons of pickle jars. What is it? Depression? What do you call it? My depression wear? Is that it? My depression wear. So, so typically I'm not going to take my whole mixture of paint here and add that because I don't know how much painting I'm going to do. So what I like to do is I will go ahead and I will grab some separate cups and I will make secondary cups that I'm actually going to put my mix in my silicone with. Use these as my colors to layer with. I'm going to pick about 4 different colors. So we've got our blue, I'm going to use some yellow. So again, this is new. We're using a new mixing board. So what I did was I have 4 cups that I started with white in case we did black out there for a minute. So now we have white without silicone in here. And now I'm doing secondary cups. Let me move this out of the way. There's white at the bottom of those. I'm doing my secondary cups that I'm actually going to be mixing my silicone in. So I've got my blue, got my yellow orange tangerine. I'm going to use purple. I like purple. And I think I'm going to use a nice light turquoise. And of course, I will be sandwiching that with white. Now, I'm going to take those, and these little cups are perfect to use these little guys so I can actually get rid of them. In those cups there, what I'm going to do is the silicone, when you twist to open it, do not twist it to open it all the way. I'm just going to twist it so it's barely open, because I'm going to go a little more. 1, 2, 3. I just put 3 drops right in there. And so again, let me come up close so you can see what I'm doing. 1, 2, 3, and then that was 4. And again, don't open this all the way or you're going to get tons of silicone, and that's going to trash your painting. 1, 2, 3. This one, the dark, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. I'm going to put 5 in that dark one. And you know, I'm just going to go ahead and put 1 more drop in each of those. And now I'm going to stir those up. Now the key to this that I have found for me is that I want to make sure, do not lift and whip, but make sure you mix that up through that paint nice. You don't just do a little stirring, stir it up. Get it nice and mixed. Stir it up. Stir it up. Stir it up. And if you have let it set, you want to make sure, give it a nice stir. And now what I'm going to do is I'm going to start layering. So I am going to, now remember, what's at the bottom of our cup, because we're going to flip all of our cups, is going to be at the top of our paint. So I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to use this navyish blue, and I'm going to gently pour it right in there. Now I don't want to pour fast because I want it to set. I like mine setting on top of that white paint that I've already poured in there. There we go. There we go. Now the other thing you can do is you can actually take this and kind of just drip it down the side, and then it's going to sit on top that way, or you can gently pour it in that way, whatever works for you. So now the next color, I'm going to go with this light turquoise. And I'm going to layer that right on top of there. And I'm going to layer it, I'm going to try to layer it about 2 times throughout these cups. Okay, and now what I'm going to add is, I think I'm going to go with my yellow, orange. I'm going to go right there. And I'm going to save my purple, because I love my purple. I'm going to save that for the very bottom, so that way the purple will gravitate hopefully up from the bottom with the cells. Line that up. Okay, and now I'm going to go ahead and add some of my white before I add my purple. Now I could, because that's a little thinner, what I could have done was between every color put a layer of the white, which would make a bit of a sandwich. Okay, and now I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to use some purple. Now for my quilting friends out there, I'm actually working on something that'll be ready in just a couple months where we're going to apply this, and I'm not talking about dyeing. We're actually going to apply this to some beautiful art, quilting art, thread painting type stuff. So that's kind of an exciting thing that I have coming out for my quilting and sewing people. Okay, and now I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to relayer what I have. So I'm going to go start again, repeat the same process. Over, 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 and I'm going to get all of that paint out of the bottom one. Waste not, want not. Okay. Go back to my lighter turquoise, put a little bit there. Now, I could go in different orders for each of these cups. You know, there is no, once you start doing this, you're going to try everything anyways. If you get into this, you know, there's a million different things you can do with this. We can do puddle pours, we can do tree ring pours. There's just tons. We can do scraping with the plastic stencil stuff, which is wonderful. A bit of orange. Come on. Get out of there. I want every little bit of that. That's one of my favorite colors. I love this color. Love it. Okay. And now I'm going to use our last bit of purple. I'll put that in our two centers. Okay. So now I'm going to top it off with a little white. And for a little pop, I am actually going to do a surprise color here. I'm going to put a little bit of red right there and dedicate that to Mr. Ritchie. A little bit of silicone. He is a primary color. Now this is going to, of course, mix with that yellow and go a little orangey red, but there's not enough yellow in there to really make that difference. So now I'm going to fill that up. Boom, and I took these guys right to the top. So we're going to have a lot of paint to be able to tilt, which I like. Okay, so now, next thing we're going to do is I'm going to bring my paints down. I'm going to bring my canvas down a little further. Let me get some of this out of the way. And this is where the magic starts. How is that, Mr. Ritchie? Is that good? Okay. Okay, so now I have a lot of friends who are really good with stuff like this. They'll take it and they'll flip it upside down and they're real good at that. I'm not that guy. I like to use this, and then I'll go ahead flip it and then I slide it right on there, flip it, slide it right on there, turn it, flip it, slide it, take it, flip it, slide it. So now I've got 4 cups. I'm going to gently kind of move those up. I'm going to let them sit there a minute. I did not spray the inside of those cups with any silicone. So we let those set for a little bit. Let the paint, give the paint time to come down. And I could have used just 2 bigger cups. I could have used one of these would have probably done it for the 11 by 14, or 2 of these probably would have done it. Again, it's a little bit of trial and error. Now the other thing is you could also do it so that you leave a little bit of negative space. Like the one I did for Rich. Mr. Ritchie, will you flash that picture up that your red, white, and yellow, or red, yellow, and blue, I think it was. And I know you'll have to, I think it was like the, no, it'll be the last one. Ta-da. So that one, notice how I left some negative space and that in the middle, and then what I did was I used a straw to do some blowouts. Now there are a ton of incredible tutorials up on YouTube for this type of stuff, and here are some of my favorite folks. Watercolor acrylics, Karen at Waterfall Acrylics. Karen is her name, and she is one of my absolute favorites. She's got quite the personality, and so you get to hear a lot of her amazing stories, but she's one of my absolute favorites. Another one of my favorites, and by the way, these people have hundreds of videos, like I have the quilting videos. Another one is Pouring Your Heart Out. Julie from Pouring Your Heart Out does an incredible job. My first time doing the Dirty Pour acrylics when I saw them was here at the Art Space building with Medina Young, who is just an amazing artist. And she does a lot of silhouette type work, and she was my first instructor. She had me do my first piece, which is actually right here. It is a cherished piece. Not totally awesome, but I love it. I love the water movement, and I'll get that in there so you can see it a little better. But I love that one, and I love the color. It's got that purple. That's so cool. Let me set that back there. Okay. I won't set on it, I promise. So, all right. So now we're going to go back to the canvas. And when I grab a hold, the one thing I don't want to do is to lift my cup straight up and let all that paint dribble on it. What I want to do is pull it down like this. Do you see how I did that? I pulled it down in a way, and I'm just going to get rid of any of that excess paint. I like to go ahead, fill my corners, but you don't want to go over this section. So again, let me show you with the next one. I take it and I tilt it and come away. Do you see how that leaves that beautiful color? If I were to have it hold over, if I were to just lift it straight up, you're going to get all these drops in there. It's not going to look as nice. So now on this one, and I'm actually going to bring this down here, and I'm going to flip it back and bring it back the opposite way. Just to add a little interest. And I like to go ahead and get my corners, because corners are hard, as you're going to see in just a minute. Now, and you can already see the cells starting to build up here. So now I'm going to come back and down. Ooh, that's pretty. I'm going to tilt it that way so that it all doesn't go off the edge. I'm going to squeeze and fill in my corners here. I'm going to go over here, because the corners are all going to be tilted off anyways. But we want some paint on those corners so that they're not bare. Okay, so now with that one, what we're going to do, we're going to give it a minute to rest. Now you're going to have people that will tell you this is the time when you would want to go ahead and start and do a torch. I like to wait until I tilt it a little bit, and then I'll do a torch after that most of the time. So that's kind of how I roll with that. So let's go back down to the canvas. Okay. So now you can see I've got a lot of white on there. So I'm going to tilt it side by side, and I think what I'm going to do is I'm going to go off this bottom edge first. Now I could go straight, but I'm going to kind of get that paint moving side to side. And I don't want to tilt too fast. There are some cells that I see that I really like the shape of. I'm going to go right off that edge, go right over there. I've got tons of paint, so I'm not going to worry too much about whether or not I don't have enough paint. Now I'm going to turn it. Now, the stuff here on the table, this is really cool because sometimes you'll see what's on the table and you'll like it better than what's on the painting. Because I'm on plastic, when that dries, it's just like an acrylic or a latex glove, and a lot of people use those skins for jewelry and such. Okay, so now I'm going to go the opposite way. We're going to tilt it back, forth, back, and I always want to bring the weight of that paint back to the middle. Now I'm going to take the paint off of this side because it looks horribly messy. So we're going to go right off that side. Now I went all the way with this one. I used a ton of different colors, and in the next one we're actually going to use mostly blues. Now I'm not real happy with what's going on here on this side, so I'm going to go ahead, I'm going to turn this, and I'm going to bring that back to the center because all of that paint has been kind of pushed down there. I'm going to bring it back to the center, and I'm going to take some right off that corner. And notice how my cells are starting to open up, and I'm starting to get some lacing right up in here. Take that right down. When I first started doing this, I liked about 75% of what I did, and then the other 25% I would always paint over. Now I'm going to bring that back to the center. I want to get rid of that bikini bottom down here. I don't like those. Okay, and now we're going to turn it. Now we're going to head back. I kind of like this movement through here because on this piece I actually wanted something that would look like a topical road map. And if you look, I'm going to bring this up a little closer so that you can see. You're going to see the cells right here in this area. Just see those beautiful little cells that are coming up. I've got some red and some green and that sort of thing. So now what I'm going to do, I've got a nice amount of paint on here. I've got a bare spot here, so I just grab some with my finger and I go over. I also do that to my corners. Anywhere I see a bare spot, I'm going to find some coordinating paint. I'm going to use some of the dark paint for this corner. And then, of course, here I've got some on the front edge, if you can see that. And so I'm simply going to just take your finger, put a little bit of paint there. If I want to go a little darker, a little color, like that. And now, I think my favorite part is this corner right here. I like that yellow. In fact, I'm going to stretch that just a little bit more. Get the paint moving. stretch it out. You just have to be patient with this. It's not a fast process. And I'm loving this side right here. Now what I could do is I could fill a whole new cup and dump it on there and start over again if I really didn't like this, but there's some interesting stuff going on in there. Okay, so now I'm going to go ahead, I'm going to grab my torch. Turn it down a little, and I'm going to go right into that spot. Now when I hit that with the torch, that's going to start popping a lot of cells, especially right here. I want some cells to be right there. Pop all those bubbles, start to activate all of that silicone. And this one has a lot of busy colors in it. Okay. So now I'm going to let that be. Now this is going to change throughout the next, I would say 12 hours of drying. By morning, this will look a little bit different. There's going to be a lot more cells that are going to work its way up. Now, what I want to do is I'm going to take this, I'm going to set this aside. I'm going to show you one more. But before I show you the next one, what I want to do, I'm going to take one of these cups and I'm going to set it off to the side. And what I'm going to do is I am going to take a tile, because I like to do this sometimes, and you can see you've got this wonderful stuff going on here. And I will do my sides first, because this is all still workable paint. I don't like to mess with a lot of it. This isn't like something that I do a lot of, but when I'm doing a lot of coasters, I'll do some of these, and I like this dark turquoise right here. So I'm going to take that, I'm going to lay that flat. Lift it up, and you can see those beautiful cells popping out right there. It's going to be a beautiful coaster. And I've got a bare spot there. So I'm going to put a little paint there. So I'm going to set this aside. Now, last one that I'm going to do real quick, I'm going to do a small one. And what I want to show you is with just some blues. I want to do some blues and whites, and then we'll be done, and then I'll take some questions. And then you give yours a shot. So I'm going to use this little canvas right there. Actually, let me set it aside. Before I do that, let me get my white on it. Now this is something that once you start, you're going to spend probably all afternoon. You're going to mix up all your paints. And remember, save your pickle jars, your olive jars. Or call Rich. He'll send you some of ours. He'd be happy to. I know that.
Our laundry room is so full of those jars that when the washer spins, it's all you hear is clang, 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 clang.
Well, isn't he special? All right. So now, and how he would know that, I don't know, because very rarely do I see him in that laundry room or the dish room. All right, so now I'm going to start with, I want something with just blues and turquoise. So I'm going to start with white. I'm going to go to now this is going to be This is going to be on the top because I'm going to tip it upside down. So I'm going to go ahead, I'm going to start with my light colors, light blue, get a little bit of that beautiful mint green in there. I like to get those lights. And a little of that. Little dark turquoise. For a little shot color. A little bit of this. And then the one on the bottom, I'm going to do this green, but what I'm going to do with this beautiful olive limey green is I'm going to go ahead, put some in there. Put my silicone. Stir it up. And it's up to you. You don't have to add silicone to all your colors. I'm going to add that right on the bottom. Now I'm going to take this guy, upside down, flip. Going to let that set there for a minute. Can you see how that's going? We'll bring up for some close-ups towards the end here with the camera. Okay, let's go back down to the canvas. Gonna bring it over. Ta-da, get my corners. Oh, I love those cells. Let that rest for a minute. You can already see the cells building up at the top. You can also see it's almost like milk paint. It's got that wonderful layer of paint on the top. So you have a lot of intensity on this side. Sorry about that, everybody. Again, it's a new mixing board, so we're learning it. I'm going to bring it this way just a little bit. I want to bring some of that intense color over here. That way, just a little. Bring it back. And now I want to straighten out my cells a little bit. Okay. So now, like I was saying before, Mr. Ritchie, if you want to come over and adjust, if you can, that camera. Let's get some close-ups here. Yep. If you can kind of rearrange it so we can see what we got so far. So let's do this guy. If you can go down there. Need me to bring it up a little bit. See that? And I love this section right here. Go in real tight on that, as tight as you can. Love that. That looks awesome. Okay, so now let's use our coaster. I'm going to do the thin and go right over my work. So if you can squeeze in on that, nice and tight, you can see all those cells working their way. Whoops. Okay. Now we have our little guy. And go in nice and tight on that one. I love that. Okay, wonderful. Thank you. Okay. Well, that is our basic dirty pour acrylic painting. So I hope you enjoyed. If you haven't done it, give it a shot. It's a wonderful way to spend the afternoon if you have kids, grandkids, big kids like me. Again, there's tons of different things. Even going to the craft and art stores and getting those wonderful little wooden boxes, or even the big wooden letters that they have there for your studio name or for your home address, and doing some dirty pour on there. We'll have some more coming down the road. I'll do some Dutch pours for a few folks, because I know I had some folks wanting to do Dutch pour. We're not going to take the time to do that today. We're already past an hour. This turned into a pretty long gig. But again, there's so many things you can do. Enjoy the process. And like I said, a few months from now, for my quilting friends out there and for my textile art friends, I've got something that's going to knock your socks off coming. So, any questions, Mr. Ritchie? No questions? Well, I think that's kind of self-explanatory. I hope everybody has a wonderful weekend. We will see you down the road. Take care of yourself and be safe out there with the quarantine that we have going on. And we'll see everybody on the other side of this, and we'll keep the tutorials coming. Next will be quilting for the rest of the week. So we've got some more of that coming.